What if I told you the biggest criminals on Earth don't hide in shadows? They wear suits, they work in towers of glass, and they're protected by the system itself. Tonight, we follow the money trail from cartel cash to Wall Street. $2 trillion exposed. Banks, cartels, one hidden pipeline. The HSBC cartel scandal. Deutsche Bank, Wachovia, names you know, crimes they buried. Why do banks never face justice while they launder billions for the most dangerous people alive? Fell companies, offshore accounts, the shadow banking system revealed. We expose the dark secrets of Wall Street, the underworld of global finance, laid bare. This is money laundering exposed. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's begin.
What if I told you that the largest bank in the world and the most violent drug cartel in Mexico share the same accountant? I know that sounds like the plot of a Netflix thriller, but stay with me here. Because what you're about to discover about money laundering exposed at the highest levels is far more disturbing than fiction. This is real. This is documented. And this hidden pipeline of dirty money is still operating right now while you're watching this video. Let me take you back to 2012, to one of the most shocking mafia banking scandals in modern history. HSBC, one of the most prestigious financial institutions on the planet, the kind of bank that runs Super Bowl commercials about trust and global responsibility, got caught red-handed laundering $881 million for the Sinaloa cartel. Now pause for a second and let that sink in. The HSBC cartel scandal revealed a terrifying truth about how cartels use the banking system. We're talking about the same organization responsible for tens of thousands of murders, for flooding American streets with cocaine and fentanyl, for turning entire regions of Mexico into war zones. And HSBC was their business partner. They weren't just looking the other way. They were actively processing the money, moving it through the shadow banking system revealed by investigators, cleaning it up so it could buy mansions and yachts and politicians. So what happened next? What do you think the punishment was for helping one of the deadliest criminal organizations in human history? This is where the dark secrets of Wall Street become infuriating. The fine was $1.9 billion. Sounds like a lot, right? Except when you realize that represented roughly 5 weeks of HSBC's profits. 5 weeks. That's it. And the number of executives who went to prison? 0. Not a single person spent a single night in jail. This is why banks never face justice, and why the banks and organized crime connection continues to thrive. The bank signed what's called a deferred prosecution agreement, essentially a pinky promise to behave better, and went right back to business as usual. Now I want you to think about that for a moment. Have you ever gotten a parking ticket that felt unfair? Have you ever seen someone get arrested for something minor while the real criminals walk free? Because that's exactly what we're witnessing here in this financial crimes documentary deep dive, except on a scale so massive it's almost impossible to comprehend. The system didn't fail. The system worked exactly as it was designed to work. And that's the white-collar crime secret nobody wants to talk about. You see, most people assume that scandals like this are mistakes, bad apples in an otherwise healthy barrel. But what if that assumption is completely wrong? What if the relationship between major banks and organized crime isn't a bug in the system but a feature? What if the world of offshore accounts and corruption, shell companies explained away as legitimate business structures, and the entire underworld of global finance isn't hidden at all, but operating in plain sight? What if the fine suits in Manhattan and the cartel bosses in Sinaloa aren't enemies operating in different worlds, but partners sharing the same infrastructure, the same roots, the same fundamental business model dressed up in different clothes? That's the question that keeps me up at night. And honestly, it should keep you up too. Because my money, all of our savings and pensions and mortgages flow through these exact same institutions. We're all part of this machine whether we know it or not. What you're going to discover in this video might fundamentally change the way you see the global financial system. We're going to follow the money trail from the streets to the boardrooms, trace the hidden connections between Wall Street and the underworld, expose the routes that dirty money has traveled for nearly a century, and understand why the biggest criminals in history will never see the inside of a prison cell. Stick with me until the end, because the deeper we go, the clearer the picture becomes. And trust me, once you see it, you can't unsee it. But before we get to the full story, we need to understand where this all began. Because the partnership between bankers and gangsters didn't start yesterday. It didn't start with HSBC or the Sinaloa cartel. It started almost 100 years ago in the smoke-filled backrooms of Prohibition-era America, where the foundations of modern money laundering were laid by men in pinstripe suits who looked a lot like. So let me ask you something before we continue. While we're here, uncovering these hidden connections that most people never get to see, I want to know what's going through your mind right now. Does any of this surprise you? Or have you always suspected that something was deeply wrong with the way the financial system operates? Maybe you've had your own experience with institutions that seem to play by a completely different set of rules than the rest of us. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts, because honestly, the conversations that happen in this comment section are often just as valuable as the content itself. Your perspective matters here. And look, I know everyone asks for likes and subscriptions, and I get that it can feel repetitive. But let me be real with you for a second. This kind of content doesn't get pushed by the algorithm. Videos about banking scandals and cartel connections and the uncomfortable truth about where money really flows, they don't exactly fit the mold of what platforms want to promote. Every comment, every subscription tells the system that people actually want to see this. It tells the algorithm that truth still matters, that there's an audience hungry for content that goes deeper than surface-level entertainment. When you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, you're not just supporting a channel. You're casting a vote for the kind of content you want to exist in the world. So if this video is resonating with you, if you're the type of person who wants to understand how the world really works behind the polished facades, then we're building something here together. This community grows one person at a time, and your participation is what makes it possible to keep producing this kind of research-intensive content. A quick tap on the like button takes half a second, but makes a real difference in how many people get to discover these stories that mainstream media often ignores. Now, with that said, let's get back to what we were uncovering. Because the HSBC scandal, as outrageous as it was, barely scratched the surface. What I'm about to show you reveals a pattern that stretches back decades, across continents, through some of the most powerful institutions ever created. The relationship between legitimate banking and organized crime isn't just a modern phenomenon. It has roots that go deep into the very foundation of how global finance was built. And understanding that history is the key to understanding why nothing ever seems to change, why the same crimes keep happening, and why the same people keep getting away with it. The story we need to examine next takes us to a time when the rules of modern banking were still being written, when the lines between legal and illegal money were deliberately blurred by people who understood that the real power lies not in following the rules, but in being the ones who write them. What you're about to learn might challenge everything you thought you knew about how wealth really moves through the world. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because to truly understand how we got here, we need to travel back in time to an era that shaped everything we see today in the world of finance. I'm talking about the 1920s and 30s, a period of radical transformation in America, when two parallel worlds were being built simultaneously. And here's the revelation that most people never consider. Wall Street and the mafia were essentially born in the same cradle, learning from each other, sometimes even working together, and developing financial techniques that would later become the backbone of modern global banking. Think about this for a moment. While Al Capone was building his criminal empire in Chicago, he faced a very specific problem that every successful criminal eventually encounters. How do you take millions of dollars in illegal cash and make it look legitimate? Capone's solution was brilliant in its simplicity. He bought laundromats, hence the term money laundering that we still use today. He invested in restaurants, nightclubs, and eventually casinos. These cash-intensive businesses allowed him to mix dirty money with legitimate revenue, creating paper trails that made illegal profits appear to come from honest enterprise. It was crude by today's standards, but it was revolutionary at the time. and the fundamental concept hasn't changed in nearly a century. But here's what the history books often overlook. The bankers on Wall Street were watching, they were learning, and they were taking notes. Because the same wealthy families and institutions that were building the modern financial system understood something crucial about the nature of money. The techniques that criminals use to hide their wealth could be refined, legitimized, and scaled up to serve an entirely different class of client. What worked for bootleggers could work even better for industrialists, politicians, and eventually multinational corporations looking to avoid taxes and hide assets from governments. The birth of offshore banking didn't happen in a vacuum. The first offshore financial centers were created specifically to provide secrecy and protection from legal scrutiny. Switzerland's famous banking secrecy laws were established in 1934, right in the middle of this era. The timing wasn't coincidental. There was enormous demand from people who wanted to hide money, whether from tax authorities, ex-spouses, business partners, or criminal investigators. The banks saw an opportunity, and they seized it. What's fascinating is how the same basic structure that Capone used has been refined and perfected over decades. Shell companies, which are legal entities that exist only on paper and have no real operations, became the sophisticated evolution of Capone's laundromats. Instead of mixing dirty cash with legitimate business revenue, modern financial engineers create layers upon layers of corporate entities, often spread across multiple jurisdictions, each one obscuring the true ownership of assets. A dollar might pass through a Delaware LLC, then to a holding company in the Cayman Islands, then to a trust in the British Virgin Islands, then to a bank account in Luxembourg. By the time it reaches its final destination, tracing its origin becomes nearly impossible. This isn't criminal innovation anymore. These are strategies taught at the finest business schools in the world. Harvard, Wharton, and the London School of Economics produce graduates who understand these structures intimately. The biggest law firms and accounting firms employ thousands of professionals whose entire job is to construct these complex financial architectures for their wealthy clients. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and every major investment bank have divisions dedicated to helping clients optimize their tax positions and protect their assets through exactly these kinds of arrangements. The transformation from criminal technique to legitimate business practice happened gradually, almost invisibly. Each step along the way seemed reasonable in isolation. Of course, wealthy people should be able to protect their assets. Of course, corporations should minimize their tax burden. Of course, international banking should allow for efficient movement of capital across borders. But when you step back and look at the complete picture, you realize that the entire system was built on a foundation that criminals constructed first. The truth that nobody wants to admit is that the line between legal and illegal in finance has always been blurry, and the people who profit most from that ambiguity are the ones who get to define where the line sits. When a drug cartel uses shell companies to launder money, it's a crime. When a hedge fund uses the same structures to avoid taxes, it's called smart financial planning. The techniques are identical, the outcomes are similar. The only difference is who's doing it, and whether they have enough lawyers and lobbyists to ensure the law sees it their way. Now, you might be thinking that surely things have changed since the 1930s. We have regulations now, oversight, international agreements designed to prevent exactly this kind of abuse. And you'd be partially right. There have been reforms, investigations, and occasionally even prosecutions. The fundamental architecture remains intact because too many powerful people benefit from keeping it that way. The same families and institutions that refined these techniques generations ago have passed them down, improved them, and defended them against every attempt at reform. Comment below and tell me. Now I understand the connection. Here's what most people completely miss about dirty money. It travels the same roads it always has. There's an invisible map that the financial elite don't want you to see. A network of routes that money has been traveling for nearly a century. And the revelation that changes everything is this. These pathways haven't fundamentally shifted since bootleggers first carved them out during Prohibition. The only transformation that occurred was making everything perfectly legal. Picture this invisible map in your mind. Switzerland sits at the center, the original fortress of financial secrecy. Then draw a line to the Cayman Islands, that tiny British territory in the Caribbean that holds more registered companies than it has residents. Connect that to Delaware, a small American state that has become the corporate secrecy capital of the world, and tie it all together through London, which serves as the clearinghouse for international finance, the place where money from everywhere flows through before disappearing into the shadows. These four nodes form the backbone of a system that moves trillions of dollars every single year, much of it completely untraceable. Here's the hidden truth that connects the past to the present. When rum runners and whiskey smugglers needed to move their profits during Prohibition, they discovered that certain jurisdictions were willing to look the other way. Swiss banks were happy to accept deposits without asking questions about where the money came from. Caribbean islands realized they could attract enormous wealth simply by offering secrecy and low taxes. These weren't accidents or coincidences. They were deliberate decisions by governments and financial institutions to create safe havens for questionable money. The bootleggers mapped out these routes, tested them, refined them, and when Prohibition ended, the routes remained. They were simply too valuable to abandon. The journey from illegal to legal happened gradually. Banks and governments realized that the same infrastructure that served criminals could serve a much larger and more respectable clientele. Wealthy individuals wanted to hide assets from divorce courts and inheritance taxes. Corporations wanted to reduce their tax burdens by booking profits in low-tax jurisdictions. Politicians wanted to stash their corruption proceeds where investigators couldn't find them. The demand was enormous, and the supply side was already built and operational. All that needed to change was the paperwork and the legal framework surrounding it. Today, the scale of what flows through these channels is almost incomprehensible. We're talking about trillions of dollars, not millions. The impact on the global economy is profound, draining tax revenue from countries that desperately need it, distorting markets, and creating a two-tier system where ordinary people play by one set of rules, while the ultra-wealthy and powerful corporations play by another entirely. And the bastidories, the behind-the-scenes mechanics of how this actually works, reveal a system designed specifically to make tracing money virtually impossible. Let me walk you through how it actually functions in practice. A CEO wants to avoid paying taxes on a massive bonus. The company pays the bonus not to the executive directly, but to a shell company in the Cayman Islands that the executive secretly controls. That shell company is owned by another shell company in the British Virgin Islands, which is in turn owned by a trust in Jersey. The trust's beneficiaries are hidden behind nominee directors, whose only job is to sign documents without asking questions. By the time anyone tries to follow the money, they're lost in a maze of corporate structures spread across multiple jurisdictions, each with its own secrecy laws designed to prevent exactly this kind of investigation. The money might eventually end up in a Swiss bank account, or it might be reinvested through London into legitimate assets like real estate or stocks. Either way, the connection between the original source and the final destination has been completely severed. This isn't conspiracy theory, this is documented reality. The revelations from the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, and countless banking investigations have shown exactly how this system operates. And some of the biggest names in global banking have been caught facilitating exactly these kinds of arrangements. Deutsche Bank, Germany's largest financial institution, has paid billions in fines for helping clients launder money, including funds connected to Russian oligarchs and organized crime. Credit Suisse, the legendary Swiss bank, collapsed in part because of scandals involving hidden wealth from dictators, criminals, and tax evaders. Danske Bank's Estonian branch moved over $200 billion in suspicious transactions, much of it coming from Russia and other former Soviet states, before anyone noticed something was wrong. These aren't isolated incidents or rogue employees acting alone. These are systemic practices built into the very DNA of how international banking operates. The fines these banks pay are simply the cost of doing business, a minor expense compared to the profits generated by serving clients who need their money to disappear. And for every scandal that becomes public, there are dozens more that never see the light of day. The decisions that protect this system are made in boardrooms and legislative chambers, by people who benefit directly from keeping things exactly as they are. What strikes me most about this whole journey through the financial underworld is how normalized it has become. We accept that corporations will use offshore structures to minimize taxes. We expect that wealthy individuals will have complex financial arrangements that ordinary people could never afford. We've been conditioned to see this as simply how the world works, rather than recognizing it as a deliberate architecture designed to benefit a very specific class of people at everyone else's expense. Drop a comment and write. The roots never changed. Here's what keeps me up at night when I think about everything we've discussed so far. We've seen the routes, we've traced the money, we've watched it flow from illegal origins through perfectly legal channels. But there's a question that hangs over all of this like a dark cloud that nobody wants to acknowledge. Why doesn't anyone go to prison? Really think about that for a moment. We're talking about trillions of dollars laundered through major financial institutions. We're talking about money connected to drug cartels, human trafficking, dictatorships that murder their own citizens. We're talking about systematic fraud that destroyed millions of lives during the financial crisis. And yet, when you look at the aftermath, when you examine who actually faced consequences, the answer is almost nobody. The banks paid fines. The executives kept their jobs, their bonuses, their beach houses, and the system kept grinding forward as if nothing had happened. There's a term that emerged from the 2008 financial crisis that perfectly captures this reality. And once you understand it, you'll never look at justice the same way again. Too big to fail became too big to jail. These institutions had become so massive, so interconnected with every aspect of the global economy, that prosecuting them would cause more damage than the crimes they committed. At least that's what we were told. The hidden truth behind this reasoning reveals something far more disturbing about how power actually operates in our society. Let me take you behind the scenes of a moment that should have changed everything, but instead confirmed our worst suspicions. In 2013, Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States, the highest law enforcement official in the country, sat before a Senate committee and said something that should have sparked outrage in every citizen who believes in equal justice. He admitted on the record that some banks had become so large that bringing criminal charges against them would have serious negative consequences for the national and global economy. Read that again and let it sink in. The person responsible for enforcing the law in America publicly admitted that certain institutions were above the law, not because they were innocent, not because they hadn't committed crimes, but because punishing them would be too inconvenient for the financial system. This wasn't a slip of the tongue or a misquote taken out of context. This was official policy, spoken aloud, accepted as reasonable by the political establishment. The transformation in how we think about corporate accountability happened right there in that moment, and most people didn't even notice. We went from a society that at least pretended everyone was equal before the law, to one that openly acknowledged a two-tiered justice system. And the bastidors of how this decision was made reveal a web of connections between Wall Street, Washington, and the revolving door that keeps them eternally intertwined. Now let me show you the contrast that makes this so devastating. While Eric Holder was explaining why bankers couldn't be prosecuted, the United States was in the middle of the largest incarceration boom in human history. Young men, predominantly black and brown, were being sentenced to decades in prison for possessing small amounts of marijuana. A 20-year-old caught with a few grams of weed could receive 10 years behind bars under mandatory minimum sentencing laws. His life destroyed, his family shattered, his future erased. Meanwhile, executives at HSBC, who admitted to laundering hundreds of millions of dollars for Mexican drug cartels responsible for tens of thousands of murders, walked away with their freedom intact. The bank paid a fine that represented about 5 weeks of profit. Nobody went to prison. Nobody lost their banking license. The impact of this disparity ripples through our entire society, creating a fundamental cynicism about whether justice means anything at all. Think about the decision-making that had to occur for this outcome to happen. Prosecutors had to weigh the crimes, look at the evidence, consider the victims, and then decide that convenience outweighed accountability. They had to write memos justifying why a settlement was better than a trial. They had to negotiate with defense lawyers who used to work in their own offices and would soon return to the private sector. The revelations from inside these negotiations show a system designed not to seek justice, but to manage public relations while protecting institutional relationships. HSBC wasn't an isolated case. It wasn't a few bad actors who slipped through the cracks. Wachovia laundered $378 billion for Mexican cartels before being absorbed by Wells Fargo. Standard Chartered moved billions for Iran in violation of international sanctions. Credit Suisse helped wealthy Americans hide money from the IRS for decades. In every single case, the pattern was identical. Evidence of systematic wrongdoing. Negotiations behind closed doors. A fine that sounds impressive in headlines, but represents a tiny fraction of the profits generated. And absolutely zero criminal accountability for the humans who made the decisions to break the law. The system isn't broken. That's the revelation that changes everything about how you understand this world. A broken system implies something that was working correctly and then malfunctioned. What we have is a system operating exactly as designed. The rules were written by people who benefit from having escape hatches built into the enforcement mechanisms. The regulations were crafted with loopholes intentionally included. The penalties were calibrated to be annoying but never existential. This was deliberate architecture, not accidental failure. And here's the psychological dimension that rarely gets discussed. When people see this disparity, when they watch small-time offenders get crushed while major criminals walk free, it doesn't just create anger. It creates a fundamental loss of faith in the entire concept of legitimate authority. Drop a comment. Justice has a price tag. Here's where this whole story takes its darkest turn. When we talk about organized crime, we have this mental image of shadowy figures in back rooms, violence, intimidation, illegal operations hidden from public view. But the hidden truth that shatters everything you thought you knew about power in the modern world is this: the most sophisticated criminal organization on the planet doesn't need to hide. It doesn't need violence. It doesn't need secrecy, because it writes the rules that define what crime even means. There's a quote that's been attributed to various people over the years, but the essence of it captures something profound. The difference between the mafia and Wall Street is that Wall Street writes the laws. Think about that for a moment. Really let it settle into your understanding. When the mob wanted to fix prices, they had to do it secretly, risking prosecution and prison. When banks want to fix prices, they spend millions on lobbyists to make sure price fixing in their industry has a different name and a legal pathway. When organized crime wanted to extract money from businesses through intimidation, we called it extortion, and sent people to prison for decades. When banks extract billions through hidden fees, manipulated interest rates, and predatory lending practices, we call it financial services and give them bailouts when things go wrong. The transformation of how these practices became normalized required decades of careful work behind the scenes. Let me walk you through the machinery that made this possible, because once you see it, you can never unsee it. The banking lobby spent over $2 billion on political influence between 1998 and 2016. That's not a typo. $2 billion, flowing directly into the pockets of the politicians responsible for writing the regulations that govern the financial industry. But here's what makes this even more revealing. That $2 billion wasn't an expense. It was an investment with returns that would make any venture capitalist jealous. For every dollar spent on lobbying, the industry received approximately $700 in regulatory benefits and bailout funds. The decisions to deregulate, to look the other way, to soften penalties, all of them can be traced back to specific lobbying efforts by specific firms targeting specific legislators. But the money is only part of the story. The real bastidores of this operation involve something far more elegant and far more corrupting. It's called the revolving door, and it represents perhaps the most successful capture of a regulatory system in modern history. Here's how it works. A young lawyer joins the Securities and Exchange Commission or the Department of Justice. They spend a few years learning how the system works, who the players are, what the enforcement priorities look like. Then they leave government and join a law firm that represents the very banks they used to regulate. Their salary increases by 500% overnight. And now, when those banks face investigation, they're defended by people who know exactly how the prosecutors think, what evidence they prioritize, and what settlements they'll accept. The jornada from regulator to regulated happens so frequently that it's not even considered newsworthy anymore. But wait, it gets even more sophisticated than that. Those same lawyers, after a few years in private practice, often return to government in senior positions. They bring with them relationships with their former banking clients and a worldview shaped by years of defending those clients' interests. They write the regulations that will govern the industry. They set enforcement priorities. They decide which cases to pursue and which to settle quietly. And everyone involved understands, without it ever being spoken aloud, that being too aggressive in prosecution might affect future career opportunities in the private sector. This isn't corruption in the traditional sense. There's no bribe, no envelope of cash, no explicit quid pro quo. It's something far more insidious. It's a system designed to produce outcomes favorable to the powerful through incentive structures that never require anyone to consciously choose corruption. Let me give you a concrete example that illustrates this perfectly. The LIBOR scandal. For decades, the London Interbank offered rates served as the benchmark for trillions of dollars in financial contracts worldwide. Your mortgage payment, your student loan interest, your credit card rate, all of them were connected to this number. And for years, major banks colluded to manipulate it for their own profit. This wasn't speculation or conspiracy theory. Internal communications were released showing traders joking about how they were rigging the rate, thanking each other for moving numbers to benefit their positions, treating the manipulation of global finance like a game between friends. In any other context, this would be recognized immediately as a cartel. If gas station owners in a small town got together and agreed to fix prices, they would face federal prosecution and prison time. But when the world's largest financial institutions did the same thing on a global scale, affecting literally every person with a loan or mortgage or credit card, the revelations led to fines that represented a fraction of the profits generated. The impact of this arrangement extends far beyond individual scandals. It creates a fundamental asymmetry in how risk and reward are distributed throughout society. When banks make successful bets, the profits flow to shareholders and executives in the form of dividends and bonuses. When those bets fail catastrophically, as they did in 2008, the losses are socialized through bailouts funded by taxpayer money. This isn't a bug in the system, it's the central feature. The mentalidad that allows this to continue unchallenged represents perhaps the greatest psychological operation ever conducted on a democratic population. Type in the comments, "The game was rigged from the start." Here's what all of this means for you, right now, today. Because everything I've just laid out isn't some abstract academic exercise or a history lesson about things that happened long ago to other people. Your money is in this system. Your retirement savings, your checking account, your mortgage, your pension fund if you're lucky enough to have one. Every single dollar you've ever earned has passed through institutions that operate under the rules I've just described. Every interest payment you've ever made has been influenced by rates that may have been manipulated. Every fee you've ever paid has been shaped by lobbying efforts designed to maximize extraction from people exactly like you. And I know what you might be feeling right now. That sense of heaviness, maybe some anger, perhaps a kind of hopelessness that settles in when you realize just how tilted the playing field really is. That reaction is completely natural. But here's what I need you to understand, and this is crucial. That feeling of powerlessness is itself part of how the system maintains itself. The complexity, the jargon, the sheer scale of these operations, all of it serves to make ordinary people feel like there's nothing they can do. The game is so rigged that participation or resistance are equally futile. But that's not true. And the evidence that it's not true is written in the headlines of the last decade. Think about what has actually changed because ordinary people refuse to stay silent. The Panama Papers didn't come from a government investigation or a regulatory crackdown. They came from a single source who leaked 11.5 million documents to journalists, exposing how the world's wealthy hide their money in offshore accounts, while the rest of us pay our taxes like we're supposed to. The revelations led to the resignation of prime ministers, the imprisonment of bankers, and fundamental changes to transparency laws in countries around the world. The FinCEN files revealed how banks knowingly moved money for criminals and corrupt politicians, triggering reforms that are still unfolding today. These weren't victories won by powerful institutions doing their jobs. They were won by journalists, whistleblowers, and millions of ordinary people who paid attention and demanded accountability. The transformation we're witnessing right now in how people relate to financial institutions didn't happen by accident. It happened because information that was once hidden behind walls of secrecy and complexity has become accessible. Because people started asking questions. Because the lies got so big and so obvious that they became impossible to ignore. And here's the truth that changes everything. The system I've been describing depends fundamentally on two things: your silence and your ignorance. Every time someone understands how the game is rigged, that's one more person who can make different decisions. One more person who can ask difficult questions. One more person who might support reforms that challenge entrenched power. Now I want to go even deeper into why this matters on a practical level for your daily life. Because knowledge isn't just power in some abstract sense. It translates into concrete decisions that affect your financial future. When you understand how banking fees work, you can avoid them or choose institutions that don't charge them. When you understand how interest rate manipulation affects your loans, you can time your borrowing differently or choose fixed rates over variable ones. When you understand how investment products are designed to benefit sellers more than buyers, you can demand better options or build wealth in different ways. The mentality shift from passive consumer to informed participant is the foundation of every meaningful change that has ever happened in how financial systems treat ordinary people. The revelations keep coming, and the pressure keeps building. Right now, there are journalists investigating the next scandal, whistleblowers gathering the courage to come forward, regulators who actually believe in their mission fighting internal battles to pursue cases against powerful institutions. The question isn't whether more truth will emerge. It's whether enough people will be paying attention when it does. Whether the impact of those revelations will translate into sustained public pressure or fade away as the news cycle moves on. Whether you and people like you will demand accountability or shrug your shoulders and assume nothing can change. The journey from ignorance to understanding is uncomfortable. Nobody wants to learn that the systems they trusted were designed to work against them. But that discomfort is the price of agency. It's the cost of being able to make real decisions based on how things actually work, rather than how we wish they worked. And once you see it, truly see it, you become part of something larger than yourself. You become someone who can explain these dynamics to others, who can recognize manipulation when it happens, who can support the journalists and activists and reformers who are fighting these battles every day. Type in the comments, knowledge is resistance. So look, if you made it this far, you're clearly not the type of person who just scrolls past things that matter. You sat through the uncomfortable parts. You followed the money. You saw the connections that most people never take the time to understand. And honestly, that says something about you. If this is the kind of content that actually resonates with how you think, if you want to keep pulling back the curtain on how things really work, then sticking around here makes sense. Hit subscribe. I go deep on stuff like this regularly, and I'd rather have a smaller audience that actually cares than millions of people who forget the video 5 minutes later. Drop a comment below. Just write, followed the money, so I know you made it to the end. I genuinely read through the comments, and there's something powerful about knowing who's actually paying attention versus who clicked away after 30 seconds. And if this video shifted something for you, if it gave you a new way of seeing the system we're all living inside, tap the like button. That's it. One tap. It helps more than you'd think, and it tells me that this kind of deep dive is worth the time it takes to put together. Now, there's a video right here that picks up where this one leaves off. Different angle, same thread. If you're still curious, if that part of your brain is still asking questions, click it, and let's keep going. See you over there.